Hello class. In this lecture, we will talk about the influences of gender and sexual orientation on the development of addictive disorders. Why is it important to talk about gender when it comes to addictive disorders? Well, Murphy and Rosenbaum in 1997, their research argued that gender, race, and class are important components to the development of drug problems and addictive disorders. They even argued that it may be more important than the drug itself. It's important to note that somebody's race, gender, or class does not prevent them from developing an addiction. However, it can influence the use and the addictive development and mediate the possible consequences. When we think about the gender differences and its influence on addictive disorders, we also need to think of the nature versus nurture debate. One example is David Reamer. I'm sure you might have heard of him. He was born with his twin as a boy, but when he was 8 months old, an accident occurred which injured his genitalia. And the doctor said the best way to fix this would be to construct it into female genitalia and raise him as a female. However, there was lots of issues for him that resulted in him eventually transitioning back into a male, but continuing to have depression and issues where he committed suicide later on in his life. Despite gender differences, drugs and alcohol can impact men and women similarly when it comes to shortening their lifespan. There are some things that are historically considered men's problems versus women's problems in addiction. For example, traditionally it's been okay for men to drink, smoke, or even use drugs socially, whereas for women it's very looked down upon. In the 1980s, alcohol abuse and dependence rates for men were 5 times more likely than women. However, it is slowly shrinking. Even in 2002, it narrowed to just 2 times the difference. And that continues to shrink. And it's not due to the fact that men's frequency of use is decreasing, but that women's frequency of use is increasing. Some more prevalence rates. In 2010, it was shown that 12% of males and 6% of females have actually been diagnosed with a substance use disorder. However, for adolescents between 12 and 17, their rate of use for all things like alcohol, tobacco, or illicit drugs is virtually the same between genders. And again, men currently are still typically more likely to be pathological gamblers, whereas women are more likely to have an eating disorder. This gap is shrinking. However, this is not an exclusively female or male problem. Let's take eating disorders, for example. We do know that eating disorders is primarily more prevalent among women, from 1 to 6 who have developed an eating disorder, and 1 out of 2 develop binge eating disorders. It is often viewed as a female or a homosexual disease because also gay men are more likely to have it than heterosexual men. We do know that there is a correlation between eating disorders and a societal weight obsession. But now that men's societal pressure to look a certain way has increased over the years, we are starting to see more and more heterosexual men having issues with eating disorders and body image. Now let's take a look at the differing consequences for addiction for men and women. Men tend to report more external consequences, whereas women tend to report more internal consequences. Women tend to progress from use to dependence a little bit faster than men do, but this trend is changing. The chance for men and women to participate in violence increases when they are drunk and high. However, when comparing genders, women are at a greater risk for being victims of violence while they are intoxicated. Childhood abuse and gender role expectations put women at a higher risk for certain negative consequences from their use. For instance, a mom who is addicted to heroin carries a lot more negative stereotypes and stigmas than that of a man who is addicted to heroin. Men also use more often and at greater quantities, and they report higher negative consequences even when you control for their frequency and their quantity. Men are also more likely to binge drink compared to women. More women are poor when comparing the genders in the same job. Women tend to make less money than men. This makes it harder for them to seek out treatment. Another thing that makes it harder for them to seek out treatment is that they are more likely to have kids, and they will have nowhere to put the kids in order to go to treatment, which makes them avoid trying to seek out treatment. Also, women experience less support for seeking out treatment, even from their partners, and they're more likely to be browbeaten into entering treatment. And they often have less familial support when they are in treatment for their addiction. They are also more likely to be criminalized for their drugs while they're pregnant. This often leads to them losing their parental rights, and kids can end up into the foster care system. Men are never pregnant, and there is no extreme punishment for fathers who use their illegal drugs. Historically, women who drank were seen as being sexually loose. Unfortunately, this stigma is still believed by many men and women, and they are more likely to be sexually assaulted or mistreated because of this belief. Women report twice as much sexual abuse than men do. However, we do know that a lot of sexual assault and abuse goes unreported by both men and women. Childhood trauma is thought to contribute to later substance abuse in women. And overall, women have higher rates of co-occurring disorders. This means that they might be struggling with an addiction as well as a mental disorder like depression. And women become intoxicated with less alcohol than men, which contributes to them having two times more likely to die from alcohol. Now let's look at sexual orientation. First, let's talk about some of the terms. LGBTQ stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer. These terms often get grouped together even though there are significant differences between them. This can help them obtain a voice, a sense of power, but it can also generalize treatment and needs instead of focusing on the specific needs of each individual. Like we discussed with gender, there is no one size fits all for each individual. The term gay is often encompassing for the whole group, which leaves out the specificities of each person. When it comes to gender and sex, sex refers to our biological chromosomes. Either you have an XX or you have an XY. This is something that cannot be changed, and because of this, it has often less influence over our identity. Gender is more fluid and flexible. A female can be born with XX chromosomes, but still identify more with males. Genders can change because it is more socially constructed. We have all heard the term act like a man or she's a girly girl. These terms were created by our culture, and their meanings can change over time. What it means to act like a man is now different after 50 years. Just like gender, there are also connotations that surround the LGBTQ community. These are often harmful and can play a huge negative role in the substance use and treatment of this population. We need to be aware of the specific isms and marginalizations of this group and culture, and it's especially important to understand the stereotypes that we hold for this group. When it comes to sexual orientation, there are some different theoretical perspectives that people have about where sexual orientation comes from. They can be a mixture of these, but for the most part, most of these theoretical perspectives fall into one of the three. The first is nature, and this belongs in this theoretical perspective. They believe that sexual orientation comes from your genotype. They believe that you're born this way. Normally, they have more of acceptance and encourage the coming out of the person. And they're also usually gay affirmative. Then there's the theory of epigenetics, and this follows in that sexual orientation is about your phenotype. It's something that is imprinted on you. It's in specific developmental windows where it occurs, and it often combines the nature versus nurture debate. In nurture, They believe this is a learned behavior. It is developed through certain experiences in a person's life. They encourage reparative therapy, which is therapy that is um, to help the individual get back to a heterosexual status, and it can be seen as very anti gay. There are many misconceptions regarding the LGBT population. This impacts treatment and can also limit their social support system. A lot of people have an idea of how someone might look or behave based on their stereotype. They are in an at risk population for the development of addictive disorders. Often, drugs or alcohol or even addictive behaviors will be used in order to deal with the social stigma or their own internalized homophobia. It's not always the case, but many gay individuals may use substances to build the courage and break down inhibitions in order to have sexual experiences with significant others. This is largely due to the individuals being influenced by families and friends who hold the belief that being gay is a sin and is unnatural and wrong. Self acceptance can be extra difficult when you have been raised to believe that you are bad, sinful, or unnatural. Because of this discrimination and prejudice towards the LGBT community, many people will not discuss this part of themselves in treatment groups. This proposes difficulties when finding a sponsor and creating a social support. It can also limit the closeness that they feel towards other group members. Risk factors for the LGBT community include difficulty finding support groups or a lack of connectedness to the supportive adults in their life. A popular place to meet other gay individuals is often gay bars, which would be problematic if they have a problem with substances. It's difficult to find a place to socialize, especially in rural communities. There are a lot of social discriminations that the LGBTQ community has to deal with on an everyday life. Not their family and friends might not be accepting of them, or they might have a difficult time accepting themselves due to the fact that they don't have a strong social support. This can lead to low self-esteem, a feeling of worthiness. They also often have a lack of role models or on TV and in real life. Many times the characters on TV are used as a comedic relief and are portrayed as silly or flamboyant. As an individual develops, they seek to be accepted by their peers and need to hide their true identity from those who are their friends, and they often push people away towards negative coping habits such as drinking and drugs. In conclusion, everyone has a unique difference, and though it's important to know that the general needs of populations can be harmful to put everyone in the same box, that being said, when treating populations who carry extra stigmas, it is important to be sensitive to those challenges that they might face. By challenging our beliefs and our stereotypes, we might be able to better help those in the underserved population.